Hey guys, so as of last week, it has officially been 1 year of me working as a registered midwife, and I've officially entered my new grad year. I thought something that could be helpful to do is share my top 7 tips that I have learned over this year. So student midwives or midwives just about to go into practice can kind of take them on board, and hopefully they can offer you guys some assistance in your training. So these are my personal ones. It doesn't necessarily mean yours will be the same, but I know these few points really did help me through my year, and they're really what I took on board the most. So the biggest one, and the one that I will always come back to, and what I consider the most important, is a midwife's intuition. Some people think that this spirituality is like all crap and they don't necessarily believe in this concept of intuition, but I can tell you now that intuition has played the biggest role in me being a midwife and being able to apply the best care to these women. Recently for me personally is an experience with a uterine rupture. So the whole shift, I was thinking this shift is going a little too straightforward, this case is a little too straightforward, something's not right here. This woman began to shake, she had an epidural, it wasn't unusual, but I just stuck right by her bedside, right with it, my hand getting the fetal heart, because I just knew that something wasn't right, and she did go on to have a uterine rupture. Similarly, I've made a video about when I found a baby blue, and that was very heavily intuition based, but it's even little things day to day where this is like a completely silly example, but still how I use my intuition. So I was looking after a woman, she didn't want Hep B and vitamin K injections, she just wanted the vitamin K drops. So on the board, I wrote for the doctors, please chart vitamin K drops and no Hep B. And as I was writing no Hep B, I'm like, oh, you know what, Hep B should probably be charted so that we can say they've declined it. But I still wrote it anyway, silly. I just like brushed it off. I was like, whatever. And anyway, the educator came to me and she's like, oh, you really shouldn't write no Hep B. Hep B does need to be charted, and we do need to say it's declined. So that's just a stupid example, but it's how my intuition is with me daily, and I'll get these little warning signs, and every time I've ignored those warning signs, I've regretted it. So my biggest piece of advice is to harness that intuition, learn to trust it, learn to follow it. The more times you follow it and you see it's right, the more you're going to use it in your day-to-day practice. The next biggest thing, and something that I've been very passionate about on this channel, is standing up to bullying. In my new grad year, I had one rule that I would have zero tolerance to bullying. I was not going to accept it, and if a midwife was going to choose to bully me, I would bring them up, I would pull them up for it, or I'd report them to an educator. We need to just say enough is enough. The more we put up with it, the more these people are going to do it. So an example is one big example that I had, and I won't go into too much detail out of, again, respect for the hospital and the midwife. We were doing handover and she came in and she was like, I need to speak to you about something that happened, like about your practice, in front of everyone. And obviously I was terrified. She's this senior midwife, everyone, she holds a lot of power, everyone's quite scared of her. And I was just like in shock. I was like, oh my God. And so as soon as handover was over, I went to speak to her. I was like, could you please tell me, like, can we discuss this? I tried to kind of be mature about it and be like, let's discuss it. She's like, no, I'm too busy now. So she left me for 3 hours wondering what I had done. And of course, because my biggest value is safety for the women, I was so concerned that something had happened with a woman and my practice had somehow influenced a woman. So having that sit on me was awful. When she finally got to talking to me, I burst into tears because I had had this anxiety and all this emotional load. Essentially what she was pulling me up on was something that was preferential practice, in that, like, it was a midwife's discretion whether she would do this or not do this, and evidence suggested that it's fine either way. It was in regards to like when to do an internal exam, and for me it's like when a woman's comfortable, and antenatally I really used it as a way to get them comfortable with the idea of internal examinations, if they were okay with that. But anyway, regardless, after she'd finished telling me off, I just said, you are bullying me. I had looked up the policy. I said this particular behavior here was intimidating. This particular behavior was like bullying, and I really laid it out to her. Then she began crying as well, and she said, I just want to be a mentor to you girls. I just wanted to pull you up. I didn't realize that, you know, I just wanted to educate you and see if you were doing something that was like best evidence and I didn't know about it. Of course, that's not how she presented it, but she did kind of backpedal, and I didn't have a problem with her again. So my biggest advice is just do not accept it. A similar example, there's this midwife that was like my number number one bullier when I was a student, and coming back to my hospital now that I trained it, I was trying to be friendly. I was gonna bury the hatchet. I saw that she was learning to cannulate, so I asked her, oh wow, like what are your hot cannula tips? I'm just learning. And she's like, honestly, you need to work on your basic skills first. And straight away, obviously, I was shut down, but I realized that that was just her. That's her way of asserting power. And all I said is, no worries, thanks for the advice, and just walked away. And I think it's just realizing like where these people are coming from. She's obviously unhappy. This is how she asserts power. And you know, there's different ways to manage different bullying, but do not put up with it. And leading on to that, the third tip would be learn the difference between a power play and a teachable moment. Just naturally in the climate of midwifery, there is these power plays and these bullying and these women trying to insert dominance, and it can be really challenging. What you've got to learn is when a midwife is actually trying to teach you, even if it may be in a bit of an aggressive manner, and when they're having a power play and it wasn't necessary to call you out. So a perfect example of a teachable moment for me was I just started at this new hospital. I just started an induction, and 40 minutes later, and if anyone knows, inductions normally can be a bit of a lengthy process, but 40 minutes later this woman was fully dilated and pushing. I hadn't got anything set up. I had just kind of commenced the induction, got my documentation done. I felt very overwhelmed, so I just hit the assist. I called for help because I didn't feel like I was in control of the situation. So I did that, and then the midwife came in and I was like, oh shoot, gotta draw up the oxytocin. So I went to draw up the oxytocin. She's like, no, don't draw up that's not your priority. Come, you know, come and help this woman birth her baby. And it was quite scary and intimidating at that moment. But afterwards she took me aside and she said, you know what, like, you're just training. I'm not expecting you to know all this, but to me the priority was not the oxytocin. You didn't need to worry about drawing that up. You needed to be with the woman. So that's just a lesson for next time. And I really took that on board, and I said, yes, maybe she could have presented a bit more gently, but I'm going to take that as a teachable moment. I'm going to use that to influence my practice. And then so the example that would contrast that is obviously with that midwife saying about, oh, you need to learn your basic skills first before getting onto cannulation. That's obviously a power play. That's not helpful. And I realized that it's like I do have my foundation down, and to me cannulation is a basic skill that a midwife needs, especially in emergencies. So it's just learning to differentiate between the two. My number 4 tip would 100% say yes to everything, no matter how much it scares you. So when you become a new grad midwife, suddenly you're doing everything on your own. So you're doing artificial ruptures of membranes, you are putting on fetal scalp electrodes, and you just have to say yes no matter how much it scares you. Obviously, if you don't feel like you have the background knowledge to do it, don't do it. But if you've learnt these things, you know it in theory, get out there and do it. For me, a big scary thing was attaching fetal scalp electrodes. So they're the little, kind of like little spirals that go into the baby's head to be able to get the heart rate clearer. Now, if you have been practicing, or perhaps even if you work in a tertiary hospital, you've probably seen that the most likely time to apply these are during an emergency situation where a baby's having a bradycardia. So it's pretty gosh darn important that you know how to do it. So for me, that was my first time that I had to do it. She was having a bradycardia, and the midwife that was with me was like, fetal scalp electrode, put one on. And I was like, I haven't put one on before. She's like, today's the day. I was like, oh gosh. But I just did it, and I got it, and then I felt so much more confident. And now in several other emergency situations, I've just been able to get there and put one on calmly. So it's really just getting out there and pushing against that resistance. On that other end of fear is where your practice improves, where you get courageous, and where you get comfortable. So if you just face up to that, you will see the endless rewards. So another massive thing, and tip number 5, would be to reflect. Now, I know during your uni course you would hear so much about reflection, and I think in our heads we've all got a reflection imagined as writing these like 2,000 word essays and having to include evidence, and that's not practical at all, and that is not how I personally reflect. And I think we've got to get that trauma from training out of our head and realize that there are simpler and more effective ways to do it. So a simple way that I like to do it, and sometimes I'll be driving home, I'll just record phone notes in my iPhone, and then later on when I'm ready, once I've slept, I can go back and edit that and kind of make it more concise. A small thing for me is, for example, a midwife was assisting me with doing a particularly difficult artificial rupture of membranes, and she said, oh, could you get me some gel? And I was like, oh, why aren't you using the obstetric cream, which is like this white cream? And she goes, when you're doing an artificial rupture of membranes, you always have to use the gel, because sometimes a woman will require prostin and it interacts negatively with the obstetric cream. So I was like, oh my God, I never knew that. The thing is, you don't know what you don't know. So I remember just like when I got a chance at morning tea, I just wrote down like, this is what you have to do. And now it's kind of like solidified in my head. So reflection doesn't have to be these paragraphs and paragraphs of things. They can just be these little tips and tricks that you learn along the way that's important to remember. For me also, I love to reflect after traumatic events. Similarly, I was speaking that I had a case of a uterine rupture. So how I reflected on that, I just told all my midwifery friends I can, with obviously respect to the woman's identity and respect to the situation. I debriefed a lot. That really helped me kind of learn from the situation and get past it and move on and not be kind of terrified and have this fear-based midwifery. So it's finding different ways to do it, but it is telling you that it's so important to do. Find what works for you and remember that it doesn't have to be these lengthy books of reflection. So another massive thing that has really helped my practice is learning to align my values. So you're obviously working in a situation that is a multidisciplinary team. You're working with other doctors, with other midwives, with all different types of women from different backgrounds who all have different preferences. So for example, one of my biggest values is obviously getting best outcomes for women and striving towards normal birth, because ultimately I know that evidence shows it's better for both women and their babies to achieve normal births when possible. But I also recognize that some midwives have practice in kind of an interventionalist way, and that's how they've been trained, and that's what they themselves believe is best practice. And then you've got doctors who I also recognize and empathize with, see the worst. They see the worst outcomes, and I recognize that they bring their trauma to that, and that's why they make a lot of their decisions. So a lot of the times I prevent myself from getting really angry at doctors or really like fiery, and just think, okay, well, how can we work together to achieve the same goal? So really a big thing has just been getting better at negotiation and being strong myself in evidence-based practice, so I can use that when I am standing up for a woman, when I'm arguing for a woman's case. For example, it's very common in my hospital for women to try for vaginal birth after cesareans. Of course, you know there's plenty of risks with that, but also lots of benefits, and a lot of women do go on to have these normal births. Often it can take a little while for women to get into established labor, especially if they're requiring, you know, an induction. And so it's negotiating with the doctors when maybe they want to intervene earlier or have a cesarean earlier. It's negotiating, okay, let's have 2 hours, give me some time, and that's when I can come in, try things like nipple stimulation, clary sage, and try all these little tricks to just buy this woman more time and help her progress. It's learning to not be like defeated by the system, not to be smashed down by the hospital system and all this, but how can you work with it, and how can you negotiate and have positive experiences with the people you're working with to ultimately achieve the best goals. So my last one, but what I think is one of the most important ones, is that it is completely okay to cry. Now I've said this before, but I am still the emotional little student I was. I've cried in my new grad year, I've cried at my new job, and so this is my little tip that just works wonders for me and what I use, and I think people should know. So I do get emotional. I try not to. I try to be the mature person, but at times I get overwhelmed. It can be that time of month. It just happens. So what I actually use is red eye drops, and I bring concealer, and I drink a lot of water. So every time I have a bit of a crying episode, I put in those eye drops, put on concealer, have a drink of water, and get back out there, and no one knows, so I don't have to deal with it. Everyone asking if I'm okay, and that just brings on more tears. I can just have my little moment, you know, gather myself and get back out there. And that's just a tip that's worked super well for me. If you're a fellow emotional midwife, perhaps you will also benefit from this. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate your guys' support. If you have any comments, any suggestions, pop them below. If you want to get in contact with me, the best way is my Instagram. It's midwife_Tyler, which I will also link below. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.